For over 40 days, a small number of people have hijacked those calls for social justice and used the cover of peaceful protests to burn and loot our city. It's enough. Over 500,000 people call this city home. All of Portland deserves safety, security, and nonviolent platform to speak their minds. I have no confidence that City Council will stand up for all of Portland. I have no confidence that the city will stop the rioting and the looting and protect the safety and livelihood of Portlanders. I have no confidence that the City Council will guide the Portland Police Bureau forward in a new era of policing that prioritizes safety, equity, reform, and police funding. I have no confidence that City Council respects and supports its rank and file officers who work tirelessly to better our community. I have no confidence that City Council wants to be part of a solution that closes the divide between police and our communities. If City Council won't stand up for Portland, we will. The PPA will be pushing 2 initiatives forward that are focused on community safety, policing, police funding and reform, and internal and external racial equity. First, Pastor Reverend Matt Hennessy and I will be holding standing quarterly roundtables that bring together police in our community. We will be inviting members of the faith community, local community members, local law enforcement executives, local law enforcement officers, and local and state elected officials. We want change. We want healing. To get there, we must continue to engage with each other. We must continue to have difficult conversations. Second, the PPA has announced an 8-part reform platform based on reasonable and constructive efforts to improve policing services for all of Portland. In my 29-year career, I have evolved daily as a person and as a police officer. Every day, the Portland Police Bureau has grown and improved as an organization. Now it is time to continue growing, improving, and evolving. Defunding police in our city will not improve or reform the police. To achieve these goals, we must invest in our police bureau. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can improve. Together, we can heal. The Portland Police Association and its members will stand up for Portland. Any questions yet?
The 8-point plan, so you support body cameras and federal funding for body cameras?
Yes, it's part of our 8-point plan. I've been a strong advocate for body cameras. I believe that it will build more trust in the community. It's an accountability measure that we need and we must have. I know Senator Lou Frederick, as well as Representative Janelle Bynum down in the state legislature, have asked those questions, and I believe our advocates also for body cams on Portland police officers and all police officers in the state.
What do you mean by fair discipline? I don't see any details on the website.
Excuse me?
Fair discipline, what do you mean? Could you elaborate?
I think the systems that we have right now can be better, can be strengthened in different ways. And what I don't want to do is stand and dictate what should happen. I think this is a conversation between the stakeholders that I talked about in the community, in the faith community, in law enforcement, as well as elected officials.
How would funding boost fair discipline?
Well, I think you can't have reform without funding. When you defund the police, you defund our ability to have resources that we need to have to use for those such things as reform. Whether it be the disciplinary system, whether it be funding for community policing, whether it be funding for accountability measures like body cams.
You mentioned that you don't believe in the council to protect Portland. What do you think the city should be doing to safeguard the city?
I think that the crime that's going on right now with the rioting and the looting and the burning, number one, City Council needs to condemn that. Wholeheartedly, unilaterally together condemn that. And not only condemn that, but ask for and make sure they follow up on the fact that the DA's office are prosecuting people who are doing these crimes, committing these crimes on a daily basis, and supporting the Police Bureau leadership and the decisions they make in dealing with rioters and dealing with the people who are out there burning and assaulting people and looting. and also support the officers of the Portland Police Bureau who are on the front lines out there every day, trying to disengage, trying to de-escalate situations that they've been involved with for the last 30 to 40 days.
And you say the city should be engaging with prosecutors to make sure cases are prosecuted. What have you seen so far in terms of prosecution of these cases?
Well, because this is just the beginning, or the beginning of not the beginning of the protest, but an ongoing process, we haven't seen what's going to happen yet. But City Council should be advocating for the prosecution of people who are destroying businesses, burning and looting, business owners, small business owners all over the city, and not just in downtown Portland, but also northeast Portland. People who are people of color, people who are immigrants, people who have had small businesses in this city for 40 or 50 years are being impacted. And especially with the impact of the pandemic of coronavirus, which many people were just on the edge of losing their businesses, and now their businesses are being impacted by rioters looting, rioters burning, rioters destroying their property. And that just can't continue.
Do you intend to take anything to the ballot to get funding? I'm not sure where you're going to get money out
No,
of
this is something that City Council can do. This is what I mean, part of City Council standing up for Portlanders. This is part of what City Council can do. They have what they call an October bump, where they look at budget again and they can add to the budget. They can add money to the budget to be able to pay for some of these reforms, to finance some of these reforms that we're talking about. We're talking about body cameras. We're talking about other accountability measures that can be implemented in a short period of time.
Can you talk about vacancies in the police bureau and upcoming retirements and how that's going to impact the bureau?
Well, obviously, that's going to have a huge impact because in August, we have a number of people that are going to retire. Right now, although they're looking at about 40 to 50 retirements in the month of August. We also have January will be another month that there will be several retirees, including myself. And so we're looking at maybe in the next 6 months, close to 100 retirees. And as for sort of recruiting efforts, obviously there's been a hiring freeze. I think that needs to be revoked. I think we need to continue to hire. I think we need to continue to look for the best of the best, a diverse group of applicants that we can bring through and start the reform that we're talking about.
So do you think any steps taken by the union in challenging discipline has contributed to the lack of trust by the community and police?
I think there's a false narrative out there that the police union is the evil empire, that we're able to go out and get bad cops their jobs back, and that's just the opposite. We don't want bad cops here. Good cops don't want bad cops. No cop wants a bad cop here. It tarnishes all of the work that we do. It tarnishes all of the trust that we've built, the relationships that we've built in communities, and especially communities of color. So we don't want that here. And as I've stated previously, during my tenure, there's been more than a dozen officers, different ranks, I shouldn't say officers, but a dozen of our members that have come in, and we've told them that they violated policies that no longer allow them to be Portland police officers. Those are things that we don't publicize, and the reason we don't publicize it, they've already been impacted because they've lost their jobs. Their families have been impacted because they lost their jobs. So it's not for us to publish. It's not for us to rub salt in an already open wound.
So there's an effort underway to have discipline of officers assembled in a national database so agencies can look at that before hiring a particular applicant. Do you support that? I'm
an advocate of that. We don't want bad cops being able to run to different agencies in the country, in the state, or anywhere else to be able to be police officers. If they were fired and terminated one place for obviously good reason, we don't want them to be able to go someplace else and work. Just like you wouldn't want a bad doctor or a bad lawyer to be able to go someplace and practice just because they can escape the fact that prior bad discipline that they had is not out there where people can see it.
And that should be public?
I think it should be at least available to other agencies so they can look at it. Obviously, the background investigations are not public, so I won't weigh in on that. I'll just weigh in on the fact that other police agencies should have that at their access so they can see your disciplinary history and make judgment on that when they do background investigations on police officers.
feel that the Bureau's handling of the protests and confrontations downtown has been appropriate?
I think it's been appropriate. I think our hands are somewhat tied based by the political dynamics of the city of Portland, and they have been for years. This is not something new. I think the protests have become more and more violent, and I don't mean the protesters. Many people out there are peaceful protesters. There's a handful, compared to how many people are out there, there's a handful of people who are always going to be out there to cause destruction, cause mayhem, cause chaos. And that's what's happening now on a nightly basis. This is unprecedented. That's something we have never seen, and there's a lot of places in the country that don't have the level of destruction, the level of chaos, the level of rioting that we've had in the city of Portland.
When you say the Bureau's hands have been tied, what do you mean? What would they be doing if their hands were not tied?
I think our commissioners are making statements and making decisions based on knee-jerk reactions and not experience. I've said this in the last couple of days, and I'll say it again. I invite any elected official to stand on the line with the officers for a night and then multiply that times 30 or 40 and think about how many days they've been out there with rocks and bottles and urine and human feces, as well as other things, fireworks thrown at them, and still not be able to use all the resources that we have to be able to disband safely and at the lowest level of force that we possibly can use to disband these riots.
So on the first night, or the first weekend, or the end of May, there were no court restrictions on police regarding use of tear gas or other less lethal, yet, there were people running throughout downtown and smashing windows of businesses and stealing merchandise. Why wouldn't the police be able to move in and try to stop that?
And I can only speculate. I was not in the command post those nights that those were happening. But I can tell you that it has to do with the political dynamics, as I said earlier, of our city, that they know that there are certain constraints that they have based on what is the expectation of City Hall. Also, our staffing issues, which are our staffing levels, have been catastrophic. I've talked about those for years. We're outnumbered, and we have to decide how we respond to the numbers and the numbers of people that were out, especially those first few nights when there were thousands of people out, and thousands of people were caught in the melee of the handful. Again, I said handful in conjunction with how many people were out there that were rioting. You have to think of the safety of the peaceful protesters and how you would address everybody else in the crowd that are just caught in the middle of the fray.
When you say the political dynamics, are you saying City Hall is calling the shots?
No, not at all. But I'm saying there's an expectation from City Hall that weighs heavily on the command staff of the Police Bureau. And I say we've had 4 chiefs in less than 4 years of our mayor's tenure. I think that bodes obviously well to the fact that we don't have a chief yet that has a familiarity with sitting in the chief's office and being able to make decisions comfortably without the concern of what City Hall will say or think. And we've seen the knee-jerk reactions through City Hall. I will have to say that Mayor Wheeler has started to speak up about the violence and condemn it, but it's been sporadic and spotty, and it needs to be a consistent message not only from Mayor Wheeler but from the whole City Council.
The question I've heard a lot is why is tear gas being used on large groups of people in response to the actions of a few? Why aren't your members going in to arrest those individuals?
And I think there's several prongs to that. I think the first prong is prior to any tear gas being used, prior to any force being used, prior to any even moving people being used, there's several warnings given out over several minutes. So it gives plenty of time for the peaceful protesters to be able to leave the area, to be able to disband, to be able to go where it's safe. I have seen some of the protests, not everyone, but I've seen some of them where that has happened. The information is out, the peaceful protesters disband and leave as soon as possible, and you just have, for the most part, you just have the people who want to riot, the people who want to burn things, the people who want to loot, the people who want to throw things at the police officers, as well as hurting peaceful protesters. What hasn't been publicized and what hasn't been talked about a lot is the injury to peaceful protesters who have been out there, who have been hit with rocks and bottles and biohazards such as human urine and feces, as well as police officers. We're incurring injuries every night. We have officers getting hurt every night. We have some officers that right now are out for days in a row because they've been injured. They've been hit by objects that have hurt them. They're hitting the helmet with bricks and frozen water in bottles. They've been hit by all types of objects for nights and nights and nights in a row. And so nobody talks about those injuries at all.
Have you been compiling a list of those?
We have not been compiling a list of those because a lot of that is HIPAA information. So we don't compile that information, and we would have to get it from the police bureau, and obviously that's protected information.
There was a reference in court documents that there have been complaints about officers' working conditions. Have you filed those?
Well, the working conditions, obviously, we're talking about hours and hours, anywhere from 12 to 20 hours of working. The first probably 20 days or so without a day off. All days off were canceled, all hands on deck. And we're not just talking about the people that were just assigned to the protest. We're talking about people that are taking calls for service too, officers that are out there still taking calls for service. Our response times have been woefully slow, understandably, and we're now relegated to several only priority type calls. So it is put a hamper on everything we do in a whole city. Portlanders are not as safe as they should be. They're not getting the service they should get, and it's all because our staffing issues, but not only our staffing issues, the support from City Council has not come to be able to allow us to act as swiftly and appropriately as we need to some of these riots, to be able to disband them earlier before they become almost out of control.
So have you filed formal complaints, or in what regard?
Well, this first step for us is the vote of no confidence to City Council. That's our first step. There will be other things that will be in the works and that will be coming in the next few days.
To what extent have you reached out to individual commissioners to talk about that aspect of your work?
And I've had conversations with some of the commissioners, with the mayor. I've had conversations with him about the lack of support, the issues that are going on. Not many conversations, but some. And I will tell you this, I sent that open letter out 2 days ago with no response from any commissioner, except for Commissioner Hardesty, and her response was that she's hoping that I'm looking and willing to sit down and talk about reforms, which I think I spelled out in that letter. I've spelled out in other letters prior to that and other releases prior to that we are willing to sit down, we are willing to talk about reform, we are willing to work with not only the community, not only communities of color, but all communities, the faith community, elected officials. We're now having people step up like Ron Herndon, who condemned the violence and even said in an email that he put out that the police officers that were in the front line showed more restraint than he could ever show. Retired Senator Ava Gordley, who put a letter out, and I think the Oregonian had that letter in there, where she also talked about elected officials need to stand up and condemn the violence. Just an editorial that was in Oregonian from Representative Jeff Barker that talked about the title of it is elected leaders need to take action to stop the rioting. This is not confined to the Portland Police Association. This is not confined to Senator Ava Garley or Representative Jeff Barker. This is about Portlanders being safe, being able to not only to conduct their businesses in the downtown area, in the northeast area, but Portlanders to be able to come downtown and enjoy downtown, to protest peacefully and exercise their First Amendment rights without fear of people in the crowd that will cause destruction, that will cause riots. This is about a social message that's being drowned out by the violence out there, by the destruction out there, by the burning out there. This message is being drowned out, and it's a message that's important. This is a message about social justice and racial equity that we need to have those conversations about, a message that can transcend the history of this country like it's never been transcended before. And this message is being drowned out, and at least in the city of Portland, I can't speak for every city in the United States, but at least in the city of Portland, drowned out by the negative attitudes and the criminal activity that's going on out there.
Part of that social justice, racial equity message is a call for outside independent oversight of an overview of police shootings. Would you support that?
And I think part of that is right now, the system we have, which is a system that very few agencies nationwide use, which is every officer involved shooting goes through a grand jury process. The grand jury is made up of community members. If we take it out of the community members' hands, then what are we doing? We're leaving it to a political faction to be able to investigate those and to weigh in on those. Right now, the process that we have right now with community members being able to weigh in on a grand jury, on officer-involved shootings with all the evidence, I think it's the best possible scenario we can have.
There've been a lot of allegations and accusations of excessive force, unnecessary force by your members. Do you feel that any of those are legitimate, and do you think that your officers are acting as well as they could be?
So are you talking about in a protest or just in general?
Yeah, in response to the protest.
In response to the protest, obviously those are investigations that will go on. So I don't have any particular ones that I've heard, but I'm sure that when the complaints are filed, if they're filed, that the investigations will be ongoing investigations. But I will tell you this: this is why I call for body cams. This is why I believe that if we had body cams, I'm not saying it's the end all to be all, but it's a huge accountability measure. It's a huge way to gain community trust, because every incident that we're seeing nationwide is somehow captured on video, either somebody's phone camera or sometimes it's body cams or dash cams from police cars. So I think it's important for us to use every opportunity that we can have to have an accountability measure, especially one that's a best practice by law enforcement nationwide that we don't have in the city of Portland. So on one hand, we say we want reform, we want new things, we want accountability measures, but on the other hand, we don't have an accountability measure that almost every police agency in the country is using. And especially in the state of Oregon, there are smaller agencies than us that are using body cams on a daily basis that we are not using.
Now, that's been talked about for years here, but, and then the funding was taken out this year. I mean, I haven't heard the union speak out that intensely in support of it over the past few years.
And I have. I've spoken out to city council, I've spoken out to the mayor, I've talked to legislative bodies about body cams and the importance of body cams. But again, it's obviously the city council thinks that they have other projects that they want to work on, other funds they want to use those projects for, and I think it's very important. They talk about accountability measures, to use one that is one of the best practices nationwide to use for everyone in law enforcement.
How has these last 40-plus days, how has it affected your members involved in crowd control? How has it affected their sense of connection to the community versus alienation?
Our members are out there on the front lines every day because their support, the First Amendment right of community members to speak, to ask for reform, to talk about social justice, to talk about racial inequities. So they're out there to make sure that people are able to do that safely and effectively, and they support that. We support that. Whether we agree or disagree with somebody's message, we still support it. We support the fact that they have that right to have that message. What we don't support is what we're seeing from the rioters. What we don't support is what we're seeing: businesses being destroyed, people being injured. What we don't support is the fact that people are getting away with criminal activity. When you go up to a police precinct full of people in there, police officers and civilians, and you put dumpsters up against the doors and set fires, that's a Class A felony. That's an arson 1. When you go to the Justice Center and you try to set it on fire with several hundred inmates as well as several dozen corrections officers in the building, and you try to set it on fire, that's a Class A felony, arson 1. When you're throwing rocks and bottles at people and you're trying to injure them and you're trying to hurt them, those are all crimes. They need to be prosecuted, they need to be convicted, and they need to know that there are consequences to their actions, and that's just not happening. And the first step to that is the condemnation by our city council of the rioting, of the looting, of the destruction, of the crimes that are being committed. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Obviously, I'll be around for questions afterwards, but I do appreciate everybody being here. And I just want to leave the one message is that we want to protect Portland. We want to make sure that Portlanders have the right to express their First Amendment rights in word and in protest. But we want to make sure that also Portlanders aren't impacted by the criminal activity that's going on out there, and they are being. And our city leaders should be the ones standing in the front of the line saying they will not tolerate this, that they condemn it. Whether they agree or not agree with the message, they should be standing in front saying they condemn the violence, and it's not happening.